Monsieur le responsable.
Dear Chief Operating Officer, dear President of the Grand Council, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the federal authorities, cantonal authorities, and the municipal authorities, dear State Chancellor, dear Director of the Geneva Graduate Institute, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to see you physically and to welcome you in this quasi-full auditorium. It's an honor to receive you also virtually for all those of you who were not able to join us tonight. University life is resuming its course as you can see from the calendar of events staged by the university for this fall. The conference that you will be able to follow this evening is organized in the context of the 7th week of democracy, which started on October 2nd and will continue until October 9th. It's the fruit of collaboration between governmental partners, including the State Chancellery, the University of Geneva, as well as the Graduate Institute, with which we collaborate very intensely, community partners, associations, as well as foundations, and partners of the International Geneva. To open this week devoted to democracy, it is a privilege for us to receive Gabriel Sterling, who will tell us in which conditions he had to stand up against pressure exerted by President Trump itself to defend a democratic institution as well as confidence in democracy itself. I recalled to Mr. Sterling a while ago how social media and how media in Switzerland and in Europe covered the stance he took at that stage. As you understood, to defend democracy, we needed to mobilize collectively. We need to think about the role of institutions. We also need to take action individually. Mr. Sterling is one of these men and women who, through their personal action, beyond their partisan beliefs, rose up to defend democracy and its institutions. Because its benefits are somewhat intangible, this is very important for democracy, and it is the best wall against any type of authoritarianism. As Abraham Lincoln said, if you think training is expensive, try ignorance. The recent pandemic also highlighted how important fundamental research and applied research are for our societies. It's an opportunity for our institutes for their expertise. It's also a risk for their independence at a point in time where there's an infodemic, as WHO coined it. Debates no longer occur in an ivory tower with a multiplication of communication channels. There is a wealth of information that is more or less reliable circulating out there. Everybody is an expert. Fake news circulate faster even than the virus and are just as dangerous. Attention rather than information and knowledge have become the major factor that leads to the economy of attention and clickbait on social media. To rise to this challenge, save democracy and its foundation, we need to improve debates between experts and society. We need to create platforms that are pluridisciplinary in nature, and we need to professionalize our transfer of knowledge. There are a certain number of initiatives that contribute to building these interdisciplinary platforms, the service of society, a certain number of platforms that were instituted with the Graduate Institute. First of all, the Avis d'Experts platform, which is a platform of experts, French-speaking experts in French-speaking Switzerland, together with experts who, on this platform, post their opinion and allow journalists to have access to it. The Geneva Science Interface, GESTA, and other events that will be taking place later this week are two platforms that enable to create links to international institutions based in Geneva to anticipate the future evolution for these international organizations. And then there's Sciences Co, whose meeting we will be celebrating tomorrow, which is a platform which enables young people of all ages to come and look at the way science is elaborated. I think it's one of our missions here at the University of Geneva. And then there's the National COVID-19 Task Force, in which a certain number of experts from our University of Geneva were intensely involved. Year in, year out, the University of Geneva is very committed to the Week of Democracy, this year again through a certain number of conferences on different topics. First of all, civil societies and democratic transition from Spain to Kosovo, which was organized this morning. It's a bit late to tell you, but I did want to speak about it. And then there's a second event, Who's Afraid of Democracy? With a research project where we drew lots to decide who would be chosen. And then the role of artificial intelligence with a roundtable organized on Thursday. I encourage you to participate to this. I won't go any further into this description. Thank you for being here. And with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Ms. Righetti, State Chancellor. Have a nice evening.
Alors, Monsieur le Recteur.
Mr. Rector has already observed all protocols. I will therefore not repeat them. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sterling, Chief Operating Officer.
Of one of the major events of the Semaine de la Démocratie, it's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight. First and foremost, I would like to thank you all for delighting us of your presence here and online. And of course, an especially warm welcome to Mr. Gabriel Sterling. You have accepted to cross over to share your experience with us. This is a great, great gift. Thanks a lot. It has all gone too far. It has to stop. Someone is going to get hurt. Someone is going to get shot. Someone is going to get killed. It has to stop. Voici quelques mots de la...
These are just a few words from what Gabriel Sterling said in December 2020. And I assume that in November 2020, no one knew who Gabriel Sterling was. No one would have recognized his face yet today. And I'm sure he's the first to be surprised about this. Everybody knows who you are, Gabriel Sterling. We all remember when you took the floor. We remember the words you uttered. I saw your speech while I was preparing tonight's conference, and I was extremely moved by it. We all remember the last American-U.S. presidential race. We all remember the intimidation, pressure, and influence exerted on the results. We can only imagine the pressure under which you had to work, you and your team. During the same speech, you spoke about death threats, sexual threats, threats of physical violence. Gabriel Sterling, you stood up in front of journalists, in front of cameras, in front of the world. You were angry. Yes, absolutely, you were angry. You publicly blamed the president for his silence. You publicly blamed the senators, Republican senators, for their silence in front of this intimidation and this violence. You were very brave, and this is something that I would like to highlight tonight in my speech. Very often we often forget that being brave is necessary in politics. We imagine that democracy is there to stay and we take it for granted. Democracy is making elections take place freely. Yes, elections are the backbone of democracy. And on a daily basis, we work to ensure that citizens, that the vote of each citizen will count. It entails a lot of security checks and controls. It also implies confidence. As you know, confidence is something that you can gain, but you can lose just as much. On search engines, as good as they are, have a hard time finding the source of this quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. When politicians, activists, and social media cast doubt about institutions, claim that there's been voter fraud, circulate fake news, attack institutions, democracy is in danger. When free and regular elections take place, no longer take place, when transition occurs, no longer occurs seamlessly, democracy is in danger. When governments that have been democratically elected silence politicians, journalists, as well as civil society, when they act in an authoritarian manner, then democracy is in danger. Ronald Reagan considered that democracy was a strong and resilient system. Mr. Sterling, I think you did say that democracy was resilient. Ronald Reagan said democracy is not a fragile little flower, it's a flower that needs to be cultivated. Well, resilience does too. Of course, democracy has many challenges to meet in terms of efficiency, in terms of inequalities, in terms of turnout and citizen commitment. The interest in the Respublica declines, yet people are less interested by political parties, and this is how populism gains ground.
It's always a work in progress. However, we must be brave enough, elevate ourselves, and continue to champion democracy as you did, Mr. Gabriel Sterling. On the field of ideology, it's a daily mission to fight against misinformation and disinformation to raise our voice. It is more important than ever to continue to work in order to inform and engage citizens. As Thomas Jefferson said it, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Thank you for your attention. Mesdames, Messieurs, merci de votre présence.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice evening.
Chère Madame Righetti.
Dear Ms. Righetti, thank you very much for this beautiful speech. And just like you did, as all protocols have been observed, I will not repeat them, but I would like to thank Yves for welcoming us tonight. And it's great to see you, Gabriel Sterling, tonight. It's with huge pleasure that I'm here. And on behalf of the Graduate Institute, I would like to thank warm-heartedly Ms. Righetti, Mr. Ferraris, and their entire team. This, thanks to their relentless efforts, we've been able, for the 7th time, to organize this week of democracy. Once again, thanks to Yves, who is welcoming us. Thanks to all his teams for the preparatory work entailed by such an event. Yves, you know how the collaboration between the University of Geneva and our Graduate Institute is close to my heart, and I'm extremely happy to have, once again tonight, an example of this collaboration. Last but not least, thanks to the team working on democracy at the Institute, especially my colleague who has joined us, whereas she has just been appointed president of Central European University in Vienna, and yet she is there. Thanks to Christine, who is here. She has worked relentlessly in the context of the Week of Democracy on behalf of the Institute. The Albert Richman Center, thanks to its positioning, insists and contributes to this week's debates. It brings an international perspective, which is extremely important, which is absolutely necessary, since the issues of democracy and democratic transition are issues that go way beyond our borders, as we have witnessed of late. They express themselves differently depending on the context, depending on the situations, but they have commonalities, and I think this center has a role to play in this respect. I'm extremely happy to see us here physically or virtually, and I'd like to greet all those of you who have joined us virtually for the launch of the 7th Week of Democracy around the issue of democratic transition. As the two previous speakers have said, democracy has been weakened. It is in transition. We've known this for quite a while now. The signs of this transition are easily identified. This is something that we can observe on a daily basis. Yves and Ms. Righetti has spoken about this. There are a certain number of topics. I mean, I'm the third to speak tonight, and it's always hard because a certain number of things have already been said. But I would like to highlight a certain number of them. Loss of confidence in democratic institutions, this is a symptom of the issue with democratic transition, then progress, commoditization of democracy. This is something that's clear in the US as well as in other countries. A democracy that is deriving towards a plutocracy, with a refusal to participate for at least a certain number of citizens in democracy, with all the consequences this may have on this democratic system. The impossibility of building bridges and establishing links between information and knowledge bubbles that are incompatible, and the scaling up of a certain number of liberal regimes all around the world. And that's where the international perspective comes in handy, with the figure of a strong man as symbolic expression. The causes are complex. They cover a certain number of dimensions. Democratic transition that we're experiencing is the result of a certain number of upheavals. I won't go into the detail of them all tonight. I would just like to highlight a certain number of important dimensions. One was mentioned by Yves tonight. That's obviously the issue of education and training. But I'd like to speak first about the imbalance that is the result of the rise in inequalities. I think it's a major factor in this democratic transition that we're experiencing. As I said, there's a loss of legitimacy, which leads some people to withdraw entirely from democracy. Another major cause, is progress of individualism, especially in the way our societies are structured, which goes hand in hand with a certain amount of fragmentation and separation of information bubbles and our own individual bubbles. It's a process whereby we're all isolated in our own groups and we're unable to communicate with each other, which is detrimental to democracy. And as Yves highlighted in his speech, there's a key role, there's the key role that is played by education. Education is there to prepare our youth to the world of work, to the world of labor. That's what we try to do on a daily basis. But maybe these past few years we've forgotten, it's a collective we, the education systems, we forgot our mission, which is to give them the means of being active as citizens, to go to think beyond national borders, since we're all interdependent. Education systems must educate and prepare to the challenges of the 21st century. It is key if we want the democratic transition to not lead to defeat. The Week of Democracy will explore all these issues as well as others which are just as important. We're extremely lucky, as Ms. Righetti and Yves have said, to have with us Gabriel Sterling to kick off this Week of Democracy. He's a very important actor in the field of democratic fights.
It's really a privilege. Gabriel Sterling is the Chief Operating Financial Officer at Georgia's Secretary of State. After graduating from the University of Georgia, he began working in Republican Party politics as a volunteer. In 1998, he ran for the Georgia House of Representatives. He was elected to the Sandy Springs City Council, taking office in 2011. In 2019, he was appointed Chief Operating Officer of the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Since 2021, Gabriel Sterling is also chairman of the committee to review the charter for the city of Sandy Springs. As Georgia's election manager, he played, as has been said already, a decisive role in the 2020 US presidential election, when he confirmed that the vote count favoring the Democratic Party was accurate. Indeed, despite being a Republican himself, he pushed back and denounced Donald Trump's request to find close to 12,000 Republican votes, which would have obviously changed the final results in the state. Since then, as we know, Mr. Sterling has been facing political pressure, death threats, as well as extraordinary media attention. I will not go back to the press conference that has been mentioned by Ms. Righetti, and we will have a chance to hear it. I will finish with his word. It has to stop. It had to stop. The question for us is, how do we make it stop? In his keynote address, and in the debate that will follow, Mr. Sterling will tell us how he came to be at the forefront of an effort to safeguard not only democratic institutions, but trust in democracy itself. Popular trust in social and political institutions is vital to the consolidation of democracy. But today, trust in the political institutions of democracy, parties, elections, parliaments, governments, is in free fall. In many of the established democracies, while many of the newly democratized societies are experiencing what Larry Diamond calls a democratic recession. Trust, however, is double-edged. Democracy requires trust, but it also presupposes an active and vigilant citizenry with a healthy skepticism to assert control over government. To use Albert Eichmann's words, while markets create managerial discipline and induce efficacy through the exercise of choice, governments are principally disciplined through the exercise of voice. Creating a bridge between the people who make our democracies work from within and academia, researchers, students, is therefore crucial, as I already underscored. This is one of the purposes of the Geneva Democracy Week, and I'm delighted that we will be hosting tomorrow at the Graduate Institute a practice-oriented workshop with Mr. Sterling and staff from various Swiss chancelleries, including Geneva, Zurich, Fribourg, and researchers from the Graduate Institute, obviously, and the University of Geneva. Je finirai avec une autre.
I would just like to finish on a quote by Albert Eichmann.
Dramatic underestimate of one's own creativity. Je suis persuadée que la.
I'm convinced that the week to come will contradict him, and I wish you fruitful, productive, and creative discussions in the days to come. We need creativity if we want to save democracy.
To these exchanges with you, Mr. Sterling, tonight, and we thank you once again for being here with us today. Thank you.
It has all gone too far. All of it. Joe de Genève today asked for Chris Krebs, a patriot who ran CISA, to be shot. A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason because he was transferring a report on batches from an EMS to a county computer so he could read it. It has to stop. Someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get killed. Well, good evening, and thank you for the warm introductions and the applause and flying me to Geneva. As I said at the time, no one should know who the heck I am. The fact that I'm here at all is literally insane, and it highlights more the threats we have seen to democracy as a whole across all of the Western democracies as we move forward. And I want to apologize for a few things. I am from the South. Traditionally, Southerners speak slowly. I do not. I will do my best if you're trying to translate or listen if English is a second language for you, so I'm apologizing on the front end for that. Secondarily, I will apologize for one other thing. When I'm angry, I become much more eloquent. I am not angry today, so I may not be nearly as eloquent as I was in that initial speech you all saw up there. And some of the basics of this are not exciting because democracy itself ought to be boring. One of the things I said to my team when I took over as the voting implementation manager for the state of Georgia, which, by the way, is the most bureaucratic name we could come up with so nobody would know what I did or how it was supposed to be done, was we want to make elections boring again because I need to set a stage. Because while we saw the large things that happened with President Trump and the big moves against democracy in the United States, we had another election in Georgia that was in 2018. And in that, there was a gubernatorial election, which was the top election in that time, which is the highest elected office in the state of Georgia. And in that, it was a very hard-fought, close election between now Governor Brian Kemp and then candidate Stacey Abrams, who was a Democrat. And in that election, there was undermining of the outcome from the other side of the aisle, because Stacey Abrams, to this day, has yet to concede. She's claimed that the election was stolen from her, the votes were suppressed. So the environment in which I took over as the voting system implementation manager and Secretary Raffensperger was elected and Deputy Secretary Fuchs was put in place, and by the way, I want to thank them because without Secretary Raffensperger and Deputy Secretary Fuchs, I would be sitting in Sandy Springs, Georgia right now, and y'all wouldn't get to hear this wonderful speech I get to give. They gave me the opportunity. One other thing I need to say and make very clear, it's October. This is very exciting for me, and it's the second most exciting thing I have this month because I get married in 19 days. And when I told her that I was coming here, she goes, well, that's October. And I said, yes. And she goes, you better not get COVID over there. So we follow all the protocols and everything. So again, I'm excited to be here. I want to make sure I said that was, she has to know, this is the second most exciting, getting married is the first. Is she here? She is not here, she is working. So we need to build up our paid time off so we can take a honeymoon. So she can't do that right now. So the way I stumbled into it, because if you talk to anybody in elections anywhere in the world, nobody is sitting in elementary school or middle school or high school or even college going, I want to get into running elections. That's just not a normal thing. Everybody sort of backs into it as I've discovered over the years. So the way it happened for me was I was involved on the outside political side, running campaigns, helping people get elected. And I did that as a living for a while. I was in business for a while. I was a business consultant. I focused on operations. And then I was on the Sandy Springs City Council, which was a city that I helped run the campaign to make it a city. It was only founded in 2005. It's just north of Atlanta. And some of y'all who are real government geeks might know this one. It was the only privatized city. All of our services were done by contractors with the exception of police and fire. So that was one of the things I was very proud of, because I think y'all call them radical liberals here, the more libertarian. And that was my focus on how I was supposed to run a city locally. So I came in, and I was appointed chief operating officer. And one of the things that came out of the 2018 election that was a big problem, and we had many, many lawsuits over it. In fact, there's still lawsuits from before, from 2017. We had an election device that we used called a DRE. It was called a direct recording election device, which you press a button, and it makes a beep, and it goes onto a memory card. There is no paper. There is no ballot. So when we did recounts, you put the memory cards in and pressed a button, and it was the same. So we decided, as a security measure and to build confidence in the election, we were going to move to a paper-based ballot system. But in Georgia, it's slightly different. In most of the United States, counties buy the election equipment themselves, and the state certifies, yes, it's okay for you to run it. In Georgia, we centralize the whole process, and the state buys all of the equipment. So that was what we came in on, and we were under the assumption that part of this work had been done. We were going to come in, we were going to pass the law to put us to paper ballots, and we would put out a bid that was already being worked on. I quickly discovered that no work had been done, and so we started having 3 meetings a week. Then the next week I said, that's not enough. We're going to do a meeting a day. The next week I said, we're going to do 2 a day. So we had a 9 a.m. meeting and a 2 p.m. meeting to write this bid. Now, I don't mean to get too much in the weeds, but it's a big part of what we have to do for this, for people to understand how I came into this. So we went through that process. The legislature passed the bill, which moved us to what's called a ballot marking device, which is a screen like we had all previously had. And when we launched screens originally, you know, we didn't have iPhones. This was all new technology when we launched them in the year 2002 for our elections. So when we redid them, we kept the screen, but then there was a printer attached to it. And it printed the ballot, and you could see and read what you had voted for, and it had a QR code so you could scan it for easy, quick scanning. And you took it, walked it over to a machine and dropped it in a scan, and that's where you voted. It was a very different process for us. And it was really funny. I don't know how many people are familiar with 1980s and 1990s American television. When we were doing the bids, two companies came in. One was the incumbent provider, and one was a newcomer. And they both had pretty strong bids, but the newcomers, their bid was a lot lower than the incumbent provider, but the incumbent provider was a little bit better on the technicals. So when we went in to negotiate the contracts, we talked with both of them, and I looked at our attorney, Ryan Germany, who some of you all may have heard of from the President Trump call, and I said, okay, who's going to be the black hat? And the black hat has to be the bad guy in the room. You're trying to really beat him up. And we said, I don't know. We walked in and sat down. I became the black hat very quickly. And I basically said, look, you know, you're winning right now, Dominion Voting Systems, but you know, ES&S knows that they can come in and lower their price. You better sharpen your pencil. And that's an American way of saying you better whipsaw your costs down. So ES&S came in and said, hey, you're first in technicals, but you know, Dominion knows you can come in and go down. You better really sharpen your pencil. And they came back, and one bidder dropped their bid by $10 million, another by $9 million. And the reason I talk about the 80s and 90s televisions, you may remember at the end of some of those TV shows, especially the comedies, they had people jump in the air and stop in midair as a sign of victory. I think I might have done that in real life when they came back at $10 million and $9 million less, because I was trying to save taxpayer money. And it was very exciting for me that we got them down that far, because we had a $150 million budget, and the initial bid came in at around 103. So I was already well ahead of that. So that allowed us to get to a point where we could buy even more equipment. So at that point, we had the bid, we signed the contract, and then we had to worry about getting 33,000 ballot marking devices, 3,300 scanners, 160 election management systems. I just know these numbers off the top of my head. And try to get them all in, and nobody in the world thought we could get it, because we had an election. We signed the contract in July. We had a presidential preference primary in March. And in Georgia, we had 3 weeks of early voting. So we had to have everything in by February. So I had an internal deadline in my head of February 14th, Valentine's Day. And we brought all the cameras in, and sure enough, on the initial bid, we got every piece of equipment out to the counties, which was a huge monumental logistical effort. I called it on one TV interview, it was a beautiful dance. We were able to get done. So that was great. So it's February, everything gets out. And then we begin the early voting for the presidential preference primary. Now, sometime in February, we start hearing about this COVID Chinese virus problem issue that we're not paying any attention to. By the first week of the end of early voting, it was all going swimmingly, and then the governor and president both declared health emergencies. And we had to change on a dime and realize, darn, I didn't say darn, that we were going to have a very big issue and vote very differently than we assumed. So our team got together with the secretary, and we decided Georgia, for years, since 2005, has had a no-excuse absentee voting ability. So what we did was we said, okay, we're going to mail an absentee ballot application to every single active voter in Georgia. And we redesigned it and sent out 6.9 million of these. From the time we made the decision to the time they were in the mail was 6 days. We were executing on a dime trying to get this done. And it was bizarre because we were lucky. Normally when you do, what we did is these were all pre-filled out, and they had a barcode so that when they came back in, they could scan, pull up the voter's name real quick. It was already filled out with their information, and it made life very easy for the voter. That was what we were trying to do because we had a belief internally, you want to make it as easy as possible for voters to vote and difficult as possible for anyone to cheat. Those are two things you have to balance at all times. And the reason I knew at the end of our election was that nobody had cheated was because we had all of our good rules in place to keep anybody from cheating. So we did that very quickly in March, and it really helped us to manage the amount of people we had coming in to vote because traditionally in Georgia, 95% of our voters vote in person. For us, that is the most secure way. They come in, the person checking them in sees them, they look at their ID, which is driver's license generally speaking, although you can use 16 different forms of identification, and any government-issued ID is allowed to be used as an ID in Georgia. But that way we securely know that they are in a good position, that you know this person has the right to vote. Historically, they don't like voting by mail in Georgia. And part of that has to do with the history of our state. Martin Luther King Jr. is from there. People have fought for the right to vote. They like the pageantry of it. They like going to see their neighbors in line. It's something that helps their heart. So we try to make it as easy as we can for them to do that. But we always had the ability to do this. That's what I said, since 2005, we've had the ability, and usually it's 4, 4, 5% who vote by mail. And traditionally, they had always been Republican, because it was people who were traveling for work, or they're running around, and that was traditionally Republicans had won until 2018, when the Democrats did a very good job of using the tools available. And one of the things I tell many of my Republican consultant friends is that don't worry about the rules. They're all just tools to vote. The main thing you gotta worry about is identifying your people, get them to the polls, and make sure they vote. I'll give an example of what happened in the 2018 election that should have given a big wake-up call to many of my Republican friends. I had just bought a house in September of 2018 in Sandy Springs. And at that time, I was a former political consultant. So it was election day. And what former political consultants do on election day is talk to other former political consultants on the phone to pontificate about what is going to happen that day. So what I did was I was pacing in my driveway, and a car pulls up. And I see a Lucy McBath pushcart. Now, Lucy McBath was a Democratic nominee for Congress in the area in which I live. And I could see that on there. I didn't pay attention to it at first. And then I saw an older African-American gentleman get out of the car. And I had 2 Republican yard signs for Governor Kemp and for Deborah Silcox, the state representative from my area, in the front yard. So this older African-American gets out of his car. He looks at his phone. He looks at me. He looks at the signs. He looks at his phone. He looks at me, looks over again, and it finally dawns on me what has happened. I bought the house from an African-American couple. And I looked at him and said, no, I'm sorry, sir. They have moved. What that showed me was the Democrats had enough resources and targeting data to send a human being to a house where they had 2 people who hadn't voted. Republicans had not worked that hard in a very long time in my state. And this was a warning that I told everybody about. And the fact that Stacey Abrams came within 55,000 votes should have laid the foundation to know that 2020 was going to be a very tight election in my state. And always it was going to be, and we told people that. Now, one of the things we talked about internally, I remember one of my lawyers said, well, Gabe, what happens if, the president loses and we have 2 runoffs for Senate? I'm like, oh, that's never going to happen. I was wrong. So I'm wrong a lot sometimes. So we did the absentee program. Then we had the first rollout in a major election in the middle of a pandemic, which means we were having a very difficult time. We were losing poll workers because COVID at the time, you got to put yourself in the mindset. We know a lot more about it now, but we're talking about May and June coming up. At that point, all we knew was it was a virus that spread pretty easily, and it had the biggest impact on old people. Do you know who votes in primaries in the United States? Old people. You know who works the polls in the United States? Old people. So we were losing poll workers left and right. And one of the issues we had is every nation in every state has counties and local governments that when something bad happens, you go, oh yeah, that's them, they don't do a good job on stuff. That's Fulton County in my state, the county in which I live. So on the election day, it was terrible. I had asked them over and over again, do you have enough poll workers? Do you have enough poll workers? Do you have enough poll workers? Yes, 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 over and over. Then the Friday before the Tuesday election, the June primary, where we had to merge the presidential preference primary and the regular primary into one election, they put out a call for 250 poll workers. Does anybody here think there's enough time to train 250 poll workers on top of the regular training we had to do? No. So many of those people had never seen the voting equipment when they walked in the door. And there were lines, there was confusion. 158 other counties got it fine. But the problem was Fulton County is Atlanta, which is the capital, which is where all the media was. So it looked like it was chaos everywhere in Georgia. It was really one county where there was chaos. So it forced us to really examine November, because at that point, it was the presidential election. It was 2 United States Senate seats that we all knew was probably going to be the central focus of which party was going to control the Senate after that. See, my Face ID can work so I can keep track of my time. Okay, I'm doing good. So we did our November action plan, which was to really push pre-election voting options, which we hadn't done in the past, provide technicians in every polling location, and then more locations. And one of the things that I did on my own was I had every county send me their allocation of equipment and personnel. And I ran them through, it was an MIT, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology algorithm. And I ran through every precinct in the state, and I did color coding. I said, if it's green, you're good to go. If it's yellow, look at it again. If it's red, you're going to have a catastrophic failure. And I sent that to all of the counties. And what we did, it was great because it gave us a lot of data to go off of to know where the problems might be. And in the November election, this was what made that Tuesday so bizarre for us. We had no lines. The average wait time around the state of Georgia was 3 minutes. The longest wait times were in some of the Republican precincts in North Georgia because the president and many other Republican elected officials said, don't use mail-in voting. So we had longer lines there because they didn't take advantage of those. We had also put out drop boxes. We had allowed for those, and 128 of our 159 counties put out drop boxes, which was a very good, safe option for people to go drop their absentee ballots in. So we had no lines. We used the early votes. Essentially, on the evening of November 5th, we were doing victory laps. You know, we had a great election. This is fantastic. And then come Wednesday, you know, I'm looking at the numbers, and I've been doing this for 30 years, 30 years at that time. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh gosh. I didn't say gosh. So I called the team together in the afternoon, and I said, look, the president's going to lose by about 10,000 votes. So I said, we got to be prepared for that, and we have to get prepared for 2 runoffs, which we knew was going to happen as well. And I was telling Christine and Valerie that the very first press conference I did that was nationally seen was the day after the election. And it was funny because I walked past a bank of cameras going to our office in the Capitol building, and there was, 100 cameras there from all over the world. And I said, wow, the secretary's going to have a lot of fun with that. And I walked in, and my boss, Jordan, said, hey, Gabe. I'm like, yeah, guess what you get to do in 5 minutes? So I had to go out and do a press conference in front of those 100 people. And I had no idea. But we did discover something. I am better if I'm not prepared. If I don't think it through and get into my own head and get in the way of it, I'm better. So that was how the press conferences began. And then at that point, the misinformation started to stack up. And we had to make 2 decisions that were, looking back on it, were obvious then, but they were a point of internal debate at the time, which was, under our law, there's supposed to be 2 runoffs, because there was a state-level runoff for Public Service Commission. Those are our energy regulators in the state, and they're elected statewide. And a guy named Bubba McDonald, yes, his name is Bubba, Lauren Bubba McDonald. I don't make that up because in Georgia we have people named Bubba. And he was in a runoff. that should have been 4 weeks after the first election, because that's what state law said. Federal law says it has to be 9 weeks after. So we had to make the decision, do we try to run the two elections at the same time, or do we move the PSC election to go in conjunction with the other election? Because we knew what the outcome would be. If we had left the election on its own, the Republican, Lauren Bo McDonald, would have crushed it. It would have been no doubt he would have won. We know that. But for election administration, it was necessary to move it with the other two elections, because our counties would have been crushed under the weight of trying to administer two separate things of absentee ballots, two separate lists, two separate elections, do all the work with those while trying to run the other election. It would have been impossible. So we made the decision to do that. The other one was, in our law, we had a new thing called audits, because for 20 previous years, there were no ballots to audit. And we had made the decision to do a risk-limiting audit early on. And that's one of those, I'm a liberal arts major, so I won't try to explain the math, but you get a certain number of ballots based on the margins from different places, and there's ballot manifests. It's a very intricate thing to kind of prove that the voting machines counted the votes accurately. And you can set your risk limit for different things. The higher the risk limit, the more ballots you look at. And we could have chosen the United States Senate race, because the margins were very wide. We would have had to do very few ballots, relatively speaking. But looking back at the time, and even I argued this, that it's a cop-out. If we don't count the presidential one by hand, no one is going to believe the results, either side. Well, one side will because they won. The other side won't because they lost. So I said, we have to do this, because one of the biggest disinformation, misinformation things out there was that the Dominion voting machines, which were every single voting machine we used in our state, were flipping votes or giving fractional votes or giving 1.3 votes to Biden for every 0.7 votes for Trump. Again, no evidence of that, but it got out there. And one of the things I loved on the disinformation and misinformation, people would put screens of spreadsheets up with code that no human knows what that is. But they say, this says this, and if you want to believe it, you believe it. So we had to do this hand count, and it was 5 million votes. And we had to execute in 159 counties, and we set it to be done in 5 days. And it was a monumental effort, and the large counties threw resources at it to get it done, and we did. And when we did that hand count, we were so close in terms of the margin. It was essentially dead on perfect. We were off by 0.1053% in the overall vote totals and 0.0099% in the margin, which essentially means, yes, the machines counted the ballots that were there. So that should have killed any discussion about Dominion voting machines doing anything. Here's a spoiler, it didn't. But we knew it did help with a lot of our legislators who at that point said, okay, it's not the Dominion voting machines, but a lot of the voters still believe that. So this continues for the month of November, essentially. And then quickly into, let's see, we had Wednesday, I knew the president was going to lose. I think they finally figured it out probably that Saturday that it was actually going to be that, because we were waiting for the military votes to come in. And they're really called military and overseas votes, because the way the law is set, you have to have your absentee ballots in by the Tuesday, the close of the polls, which is 7 o'clock. But then you have 3 different types of ballots that can be counted through Friday. One is provisional ballots. Like, let's say you couldn't prove who you were at the polling location, but you wanted to go ahead and vote. You had to come in with your ID within 3 days for that Friday. Cured ballots. You had an absentee ballot you sent in, but your signature was off or you forgot your signature. You have 3 days to come in and cure it. And the military and overseas can be postmarked by that Tuesday, but they have to be received by that Friday. So those are the last bit of ballots we were expecting to come in. And when we did that, we saw that there wasn't going to be enough to change the outcome. And then sort of the tenor and tone from the Republicans changed pretty quickly, because it was interesting because it was so close. The Democrats didn't want to claim victory or start complaining about anything. The Republicans didn't want to claim victory or start attacking anything because they didn't know if they had won yet. So we bought some time there, but quickly we moved to another stage. And I remember I had a friend working on the Senator Loeffler campaign who texted me on that morning when they called for resignation. And I read this thing. I literally laughed. And I texted her back and I said, this is a joke, right? And she goes, it's being released in 5 minutes. At that point, my heart kind of sank because I said, this is insane. This is ridiculous. They literally, one of the things they claimed was we weren't being transparent. I said, we were doing 2 press conferences a day explaining everything we could. I literally said to some of the press, I said, The only way I could be more transparent is if I came out here in my boxers. I mean, that is the only way we can be more transparent than we are now. And for them to make that claim, it then kicked it into another gear, and that was the day the death threat started. That was the day that Secretary Raffensperger's wife of 40 years, Tricia, on her personal cell phone, started getting attacked. And it got a little scary on that front. And they started for me. And again, I put myself in front of the TV cameras. It's not acceptable, but it's sort of expected now that things like that's going to happen. The secretary had the same thing. In fact, having been on the city council in the city in which I live, I was at least able to call the chief of police and say, look, I'm getting these threats. I had a weird FedEx package. I had police come over, inspect it, and grab it and take it out. And so I finally said, hey, I know you can't afford to give me a body detail or something. The secretary had Georgia State Patrol who was given to him, so that was great. So what we did was they parked an extra police car outside my house. So people would talk about my police protection. And when I would do interviews, I said, we don't talk about my security, because the main reason was I had no security. So that was the environment in which we were dealing. So we go through most of November, we do the hand recount, and I'm literally out there, and I mean, every single day, and just pushing back on disinformation and misinformation. I mean, for those of you who are true election geeks, the broken water main at State Farm Arena where we counted absentee votes, to the flipping of votes, to the Hugo Chavez Venezuela connection of software for a dead dictator who came in to do things in our state. It was another really great one was an Italian satellite scientist had moved the votes to Spain and Germany to be counted and sent back. I started doing these, I don't even know what some of these meant sometimes. Like some of y'all may have heard of a gentleman named Lynn Wood, who arguably is in need of very desperate help. Because he's not mentally there anymore. He called me out personally one time going, we're not going to send our votes to, or sell our votes to China. I don't even know what the heck that meant. But we saw more and more of that, and then those same people who were supporting the president were making these crazy claims. And I remember one time I walked in the state capitol and somebody said, well, Rudy Giuliani's here. I was like, why? And he was testifying to the state senate, or a state senate committee. And I will go to my grave believing this. Rudy Giuliani looked at this videotape of State Farm and talked about the secret suitcases full of ballots. His team watched that whole video. Our team watched that whole video. He knew he was lying. I know he knew he was lying. I have zero doubt in my heart till I die he was lying. The problem is people wanted to believe him. And that's one of the issues that we have, is the sense of belief from human beings. And I remember my little brother studied political science at George Mason University in Washington, D.C., or outside of Washington. And all of you have family members when they're in school that come in, hey, this is what I learned in school today, especially if you're in the same industry. And he came to me and said, hey, I want to talk to you about the concept of the rational voter. I said, stop. There is no such thing as a rational voter. Human beings are rationalizing creatures. We will believe something and find every piece of evidence to reinforce that before we will ever be told something different. That is how human beings work. And that's one of the problems with democracy, is we have human beings involved. Democracy is a messy and terrible form of government. It just happens to be better than every other one. And it's hard to make work. And one of the things the rector said before was that I stood up in spite of my party. I disagree. I stood up because of my party, because of my values, and because of my belief. I am a Republican large R, but I'm also a Republican small r. I had no choice. I had no choice. I was given a position of responsibility. And one of the issues we've run into is that people are so focused on the win. They're so focused on, I want to own the other side. And one of the issues that we've had in the United States, and one of the reasons we even had Donald Trump elected to begin with, is for 50 years, people who believe similarly to me, who might be in a rural area, might be a blue-collar worker, might be a small business owner, especially small business owners, have been talked down to. For lack of a better word, they've had sand kicked in their face. And the Republicans who've been elected, who've been defending and fighting these people, tended to be more gentlemanly. They tended not to hit people in the mouth or verbally do so. And what Donald Trump did for many people, and this is one of my relatives I talked to who told me, he's the only one who's fought for us. I said, no, no. Ronald Reagan fought for you. Paul Ryan fought for you. Newt Gingrich fought for you. I said, the difference is he hit them in the mouth, and you liked it. because it made you feel vindicated and better at some point. And that is one of the big draws from them. And what we have to realize, and I don't want anybody to walk away from this villainizing Trump supporters. I voted for the man. I still said he was wrong and that he lost. There are tens of millions of good, hardworking Americans who believed in the man because he felt like he was fighting for them and their values. And they have been told by the other side, by many people for years, that they don't count and they don't matter. And one of the things we saw from Brexit and from the Donald Trump election is, using data, people were able to find these sort of lost souls, and they brought them into the system. And there's frankly nothing wrong with bringing people into the system. The problem that we run into on the left and the right is oftentimes to break people out of the rut that they've been in, that they don't count, that they don't matter, is the populist message. And the other problem we have is human beings are built with a sense of religiosity. I know it's a weird thing to talk about in politics, but if you got to go back, the very first thing human beings ever built is a Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It was a religious shrine. No other settlements around it. For years, we always were under the impression that went from hunters and gatherers to doing agriculture, and then we kind of found religion after that. It seems it was a deeper thing in the human psyche to do the religion first, and then civilization came. We always have to realize that the human mind, evolutionary-wise, has been found to find saviors. And that's unhealthy for a democracy. When Barack Obama was elected, he was hailed as a messiah by many, many people who said, he is our leader, he's going to save us from everything. When Donald Trump was elected, he was hailed as a messiah. He was our leader, he's going to save us from many, many things. What we have to get to a point in a democracy is, you need to take care of yourself, and we need to have a government we don't even realize is there. When you call the police, they ought to show up. When the road needs to get paved, it's going to get paved. The mail gets delivered, it gets delivered. Government's there to kind of put up rails to allow us to function as individuals in a society. And when we get to a point where people can convince other people to give them power to save them, either be it from the left or the right, we have reached a dangerous point in democracy when people start to believe that. Because one of the reasons we have, and what's so dangerous about what Stacey Abrams did in 2018 in Georgia, and what Donald Trump, who had more responsibility because he was president, I get that, she was just a candidate, did in 2020, saying voter suppression, stolen election, saying voter fraud, stolen election, it undermines people on both sides. There's a reason we have democracy. You have ballots so you can avoid bullets. If you start convincing people that ballots don't matter, what is the next logical step? That is the danger on all sides of that. So I'll move forward to the call. When the president called, and on January 2nd, I believe it was, I was on the phone with Deputy Secretary Fuchs, who offhandedly says, oh, yes, by the way, we're getting on a call with Donald Trump in 60 seconds. I got to go. And I was like, wait, and she hung up. For about 18 hours, I was really not happy because I should have been on that call. And then I heard the call the next day from the Washington Post. I could not have been the happier person in the world that I was not on that call. Because as y'all know, the president talked for about 50 minutes of the 60-minute call himself. I envisioned something very different had I been on that call. And, I can talk really a big show now, but I have a feeling I probably would have interrupted and it would have turned into a ridiculous screaming match. Because my family is a family of shouters, and we'll be done in 30 seconds, but that's what happens. So I was very happy I was on that call, but I knew from all the claims of voter fraud, here's the difference between what Stacey Abrams and the Democrats did and what Donald Trump and the Republicans did. Stacey Abrams claimed voter suppression. If somebody tells you, as an American or as a human being, someone is keeping you from doing something, what is your natural inclination? I'm going to go do more of that. I'm going to do everything I can to prove those people wrong. If somebody tells you they have stolen your vote doesn't count, what's your natural inclination? Well, what's the point? I'll stay home. I saw what was happening on the January runoff, where the balance of the United States Senate, the greatest deliberative body in the world, according to them, was at stake. And I knew we were going to have people not show up. It was obvious. And if you look at the post-election results, you can see that in the areas where Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is our irresponsible, over-the-top Republican congresswoman from northwest Georgia, it fell down by hundreds of thousands. In South Georgia, same thing. And then both senators lost. And on some levels, I have some sympathy for Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue when they called for resignation, because I know what happened. President Trump said, if you do not call for his resignation, I'm going to torpedo your campaigns right now. because Trump is all about Trump. He's not about the Republican Party. You gotta realize I've been a Republican longer than Donald Trump. I will be a Republican after Donald Trump is gone. To me, this is more my party. I don't care how many people say it's Trump's party, it's mine. And I will continue to fight for it because there are values that are important that help America move forward. And very different from parliamentary democracy, our coalitions are made beforehand. That's why we have two basic big parties. And they have to be a big tent if you're going to win. And we will get through all this. But the misinformation, disinformation comes from all sides, and really from the right now. And it's also being pushed by foreign powers. We know the Iranians did a lot of it, the Russians, and it's easy to exploit because it's cheap, it's hard to trace, so we have to be very much on guard for it. And one of the things we did talk about before is we have to always be aware and always be looking for ways to strengthen democracy, strengthen the institutions, and understand the history of the institutions. One of the issues I believe all Western democracies have, and all governments in the world, is most people who are alive believe history either began the day they were born or the day their parents were born. There is a very ahistorical nature to looking at most of these items. People talk about how terrible it is in the United States today. In the 70s, we had bombings on the regular. I mean, there were hundreds of them all the time, people getting killed. And I remember there was a New York Post article, a woman was quoted, oh, there was another bombing, what was this for? The 1968 Democratic Convention was a riot. People were clubbed by police. You know, in 1974, the Republicans were decimated at the polls because of Richard Nixon having Watergate. Now, when you look at what happened in 1980, 6 short years later, Ronald Reagan wins in a landslide. I think social media and regular media even compresses these waves and times down. So when people ask me if I'm optimistic about the future, I'm optimistic. I'm only optimistic insofar as we stay aware of the issues we have to face. And you have to always be vigilant about it. And what has been heartening for me is I got handwritten letters from across the globe thanking me for what we did. The secretary got handwritten letters from across the globe thanking him for what he did. And let's face it, I was a functionary. As I said at the beginning, no one should know who I am. The secretary was the elected official. He put his name on the line to get elected. And like I said, he was a huge Trump supporter. Gave him money, wanted him to win desperately. He was a Trump supporter before anybody else I knew. I mean, I didn't vote for him in the primary, and if you go online, it looks like I've been a never-Trumper all the way through. But it was a primary, and this is the interesting thing about our system, and we have to look at this in America. In 2016, we had 2 nominees. We had Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Somehow, 2 major American political parties, after 200 years, managed to nominate the only 2 human beings in America who could possibly lose to the other person. I mean, there's something functionally wrong with that. You should get to a point of good consensus on those fronts. We have to reach a point of maturity, too, because one of the things I think we're all spoiled at now is that Amazon has spoiled everyone. I'm going to look online, I'm going to find what I want it delivered to my house in 2 hours or tomorrow. And that's the problem with democracy. Nothing works like that. People ask me all the time, well, what about the gridlock? I'm like, you act like that's a problem. To me, that's a feature, not a bug. Because if you can pass things willy-nilly easily, that means the next election they can be unpassed willy-nilly easily, which does not lead to good continuity or faith in the outcomes of the system. It's supposed to be hard to do things. We have to get voters and media into a maturity level to accept that. That is a very difficult thing, but populism rails against that. You can get everything you want, and I'm here to give it to you. I can make your life better. I can do everything you need. And that's never a safe or mature way to do it. We just need more adults in the room. But guess what? Adults in the room don't get 100,000 retweets. Adults in the room don't get media coverage on 60 Minutes America or on the nightly news because it's not interesting. Governing should be boring. It should be easier to say, you know what, I can't do that today. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to convince other people. You have the best idea in the world, sell it. I mean, all Americans are salesmen. That's what we do. And just because you lost is not a repudiation of you as a human being. But people wrap up their lives in these things, especially people on Twitter. I swear if there was a way we could clean it up, I would. But, I mean, I've had very deep, long debates on Twitter because it's a great way to get information out quickly. But I always will have a faith in the long term of Western democracies because we have to. Western democracies, and frankly, Western cultural foundations is what has lifted the world out of poverty. Free trade, rule of law, private property, all of those things have lifted the people of the planet up. And the fact that it's under threat now is amazing to me. We should thank our lucky stars and pray and thank God every day we are alive today on this planet. I was thinking about this. There was a comedian who had something about this one time. I was literally on a plane flying over the ocean to get here in a chair watching a movie, a Marvel movie made in Georgia. And I was like, this is amazing. And then it clicked for a second. I was like, oh, man. And I was complaining about the fact that it stopped for a second. We need to have some better perspective about our lives. Yes, we should always fight to make our lives better, but one of the things I think we should all try to do, and this goes back to something that I've tried to focus on as a public servant, all of your public service should start in your neighborhood. I've had this thing where I said, if I'm king for a day, this is what I would like to do. If you're going to get elected in the United States, we have local government. You have to get elected to a city council, a county commission, or a school board and serve for a full term. Because the problem we have now is we have personalities get elected who aren't trying to do something, they're trying to be somebody. When you're elected to the local level, people know where you live, they see you at the restaurants, they see you at church, they see you at the park, and they're going to stop you and hold you accountable. One of the problems we have for bigger levels of democracy is no one is accountable. You can hide behind other people, and that's a problem. We've got to find a way to give people more faith in it, and if we focus on the local level and diffuse power from the top down, that will make people feel more engaged. There's no perfect way to do any of these, and every democracy is different, and they are driven by the culture and history of the place where they're operating. Y'all's level of direct democracy, I will tell you, freaks me out, because it's very hard to know the long-term consequences of some of those. But it's something that y'all have used for years. And I do like the things you do in your primitive cantons, where they all get into a big field and vote together. That seems like a great thing, other than the fact that it's not a secret vote. But I hope what I've talked about has given you some context, and I hope what I've talked about has given you some ideas of what we can all do and work together in all the Western democracies to not only make our Western democracies better, but to spread Western philosophy and a Western-style democracy to every nation on the planet for the betterment of humankind. So thank you all very much.
Stay on stage? Yeah, stay on stage.
No chair.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriel Sterling, for your testimony and analysis of this very particular episode on the American elections. And also, I have a good news for you. You can be calm and very eloquent. So now I will welcome my colleague from the Graduate Institute. She's going to share this question time with me. She's the director of the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy. Shalini Randia, please welcome on stage with me. In the center. So now the idea is that we're going to have half an hour to answer to your questions, so he will answer your questions. There's also the opportunity for people online to ask questions, and then at the end, our colleague from the State Department of Geneva, Valérie Vuillet, will will just make a kind of sum up of the most important questions. So let's start perhaps with a very short question on our part, because it's our privilege. And I will start with a very personal question, if may I. You said that you are a civil servant, you are not a member of an elected body, and suddenly, in a couple of days, you became a very popular figure, like in a TV show, the most popular character, as a defender of democracy. So how do you live, or how are you facing this new life, if I can say, and push it in these terms?
It's weird. I have no other way to talk about it. I was just doing my job. And what happened was that particular day, obviously, I got pissed. Now, to be clear, in English, pissed in England means you're drunk, pissed in America means you're angry. So I was not drunk, I was just very angry. And because of that, I had a pent-up frustration. And it was difficult being in the same party as the president who was spreading misinformation, disinformation about what I felt like me and my team, and literally tens of thousands of Georgians and hundreds of thousands of American poll workers and workers throughout had done a fantastic, amazing job under tons of pressure post-2016 and 2018 to run a free, fair, solid election. And there's always going to be issues in every election. You know why? Because human beings are involved. Guess what? We're fallible. We make mistakes. But we had done such a good job on the front end, those minor tweaks on the left or right didn't move the ball. And normally when you have issues, they usually affect Republican ballots and Democrat ballots, so it's sort of a wash. That's why recounts generally don't ever change anything. But it was a hard thing to fathom. It was a difficult thing to take. I shouldn't have had to be in that position. But if I want to go back and think it was fate or luck or bad luck or God, whatever put me and Secretary Raffensperger in the position to do that, I'm thankful that I was there to a degree. It's still very strange for me.
Thank you very much. In many interviews, you said that American democracy has suffered, but has resisted. Mm-hmm. And my question is, at what price for democracy, American democracy, but also for the federal state?
Well, if you look at it, one of the things, going through adversity is what stretches you and works out the democracy muscle more than anything. If it's always easy when there is an attack on the democracy, then it's much more fragile. But if you start building up the institutions and safeguards around it and making individuals in academia, in business, and at the local governments work together on it, it can be resilient. If it was always there and we just expect it to work without ever questioning it, that is even less healthy to a degree. So I think that, yes, it was terrible to go through. But I think now that we're going to have people who are going to have no choice when they look at, after passing some of these new laws and rules, and after running another election, one of the things you'll find that election workers around the world do, especially in the United States, is they pray for two things. High turnout and wide margins. Because wide margins tend to hide a multitude of sins that might be there, and high turnout means you have as many people to participate in democracy as you can. So I think we are all, Republican and Democrat, left and right, want there to be as many people involved in the process at the end of the day. There are some Republicans that I will admit I've seen who are not happy having big turnouts. But I think our job as Republicans is to go fight for every vote and convince those people that you are better off with us in office looking out for you than the other party.
Thank you. Shalini Randaria.
So if I may draw you to the larger question here, democracy in transition. Okay. And you ended by saying you would wish that there would be a greater transition to Western-style democracies. Mm-hmm. I think what we are seeing at the moment is no longer a transition to democracy, but transitions within democracies. And two of the transitions I think you pointed out to. One, the fact that there is an erosion of trust, and it's an erosion of trust which is massive. I mean, what we saw in the US over the last few years is it's an erosion of trust in democracy from both sides, so that both parties are beginning to doubt the results of elections for different reasons. Now, I know as a Republican you're going to have trouble with what I'm going to say to you, but I
have no problem telling you you're wrong. It's okay.
You know I'm wrong. Okay. Now, let me tell you why I think I may have a point, which is that I think what we are seeing is a dismantling of democracies from within. It's not just the US. We are seeing it in so many countries. Hungary is a good example, Turkey too. Don't forget Brazil. Yes, Brazil too. But in Britain too, we are seeing some very interesting things which the Johnson government has put into place, which reduces the power to demonstrate, which is attacking courts. So we are seeing this transition in a lot of places. So there are some things peculiar to the US system as well, but it's not just specific to the US. The question here would be, which I said, this is what I don't think you're going to like, and that is, I think there's a history of the Republican Party gerrymandering, which is something which other people have taken over. I mean, Orban has gerrymandered all of Hungary by copying the playbook, but you also have legislation which is skewing the election results permanently by trying to make sure that those who are in power stay in power. So that I think the problem there is if you do this through formal democratic means, you are undermining the legitimacy of the voting process. And you are right that it's on both sides, but the difference is Stacey Abrams says go out and vote. The other side says, don't bother, your vote doesn't count. And I think that makes a difference to the outcome in democracies.
I think it does, and frankly, it's better for Democrats if that continues to be the thing, which I keep telling my Republican friends, shut up, the election was real, stop telling people their votes didn't count. But as far as gerrymandering goes, let's realize where it came from. It was from a congressman named Jerry in Massachusetts. I think it's actually pronounced Gary, but it became Jerry over the years. And we've seen it, again, I'm on both sides of this, because in Georgia, where I live, Republicans were only in charge of drawing maps one time. It was in 2010. It was the only time in the previous 40 years that the map passed the Voting Rights Act and constitutional muster. Every map ever drawn by a Democrat has always been thrown out for violating the Voting Rights Act of blacks and African Americans in my state, or violating one man, one vote. Now, there are times that there was a coalition between blacks and Republicans in the 90s, because what happened was white Democrats basically said, I want to have 30% African Americans in my district so that I win. But I don't want to have African Americans have enough blacks in their district for them to win. So what we've seen over the years is the courts basically said under the Voting Rights Act that if you could draw a minority district, you must do it. And that happened in the 90s. But by doing that, what happened was you had highly packed Democrat districts, and then you had bleached out very Republican districts. Now, what's happened in the United States is, generally speaking, we've seen a geographic change. Before, Republicans and Democrats lived in and amongst each other and around each other. There's been a sorting, and Democrats tend to live in highly dense urban areas.
But you're also seeing a demographic change, as the 2021 census shows in the US.
But not in Georgia so much. We've always been...
But in the US.
In the US, yes. But in Georgia, which is where I'm from, and that's what I can talk about most clearly, we've always been a highly African-American state. We have had a large black population. In fact, there are more African Americans in Georgia than any other state in the country, save one, and that just only changed this time. Until the census, we were the #1 state for population. So what we've seen is it's difficult, without gerrymandering, to draw seats where Democrats can win, because you have to basically, we call it the spoken wheel. You start in an urban area, then roll out to do that. So that's gerrymandering too. Gerrymandering to achieve one side for one purpose, is it just as immoral or wrong as to achieve it for the other side? So what the Republicans did was they said, okay, we have communities of interest, we keep them compact. It's very hard to look at our maps compared to the Democrat maps and say they've been gerrymandered in any way that's not appropriate. Now, some people want to hand it off to non-elected, independent bodies. Here's my problem with that. Human beings are impossibly, except maybe the Swiss, because I've learned about this with the ability, they are impossibly partisan. They all have their own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And I just don't believe, and right now in Ohio, they handed it off to an independent district, and the left is still suing over it, even though some of them accept it. It's sort of like pornography. You can't define it, but you know it when you see it. And the problem is we're driven by our own outcomes, looking at it, believing it that way. So look at California and in New York, there are more Republican voters there than there are congressional seats. So it's just as it's done in similar ways there. It's hard to have Iowa. You know, it's a flat map and you split those things up easily. But for the structural side, I will absolutely agree that there are ways, especially right now, another threat from my point of view is federalizing the elections and saying, you must do things this way, you have to do that. I am very jealously guarding our federal system. And one of the things I closed with was we need to have more focus on the local. And by federalizing and centralizing things over and over again, that's becoming more and more dangerous for the democracy to stay safe and relevant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps some Swiss citizens would like to react. So the audience can ask questions either in French or English. Yes. Oh, over there. Yeah, the microphone. Yeah. Yes, please.
J'aimerais parler en français.
I'd like to ask a question in French, if I may. You, Mr. Sterling, you explained very well and in many details the 2020 elections. And what I have to say has to do with the meaning of democracy for Americans. The rector told us about information. Information is a very important word. Marie-Laure told us about democracy, international democracy, transnational democracy, which is also extremely important. Ms. Rigetti spoke about the backbone of democracy, which is voting rights. I would like to add the fact that you said the backbone and the muscle of democracy is diversity. Whereas for me, information is the backbone of democracy. If you want your people to know for whom it votes and why it votes, it has to be informed. It has to have information at its disposal. In the United States, most people are not informed about what their government does in the entire world. 2% of all Americans read the New York Times, only 2% when it's an excellent newspaper. Could you please ask your question? The budget, most of the budget in the US is spent to influence others. So is democracy, is the coup that occurred in 1953 in Iran, what they did in Sudan just before 9/11, which led to 9/11. They went and bombed.
Si vous permettez.
It's extremely important. I'm sorry.
Pour la qualité du débat, si vous me permettez.
If I may, there are other people who would like to ask a question. We've got a limited amount of time at our disposal. If you could just ask your question.
I can answer it from here. I got the basis of what you're trying to say. I understand.
Merci.
Well, first, I can't force people to read the New York Times. Secondarily, I probably wouldn't given my own proclivities. The United States has operated in the world we really began working on a world stage under Theodore Roosevelt when he was the Deputy Secretary of the Navy, and so we started really exerting power worldwide. You're right, and for the most part, I know you may not agree, I believe our outcomes have been positive for the world. I think there was a small issue in 1917 when the United States kind of helped out over here in Europe and in World War II. And mostly what we asked for, to quote Colin Powell, was a small plot to bury our dead. We did not keep our people here. We did not occupy. And granted, there's always going to be issues when you get involved in the world. I think Iraq was an overreach. I think that Afghanistan was the same difficulty that everybody from Alexander the Great through the Russians and through us have run into problems over the years. There's no question. The most people ever vote for, whether it be in Switzerland or France or England or in Russia when they had elections that actually mattered, was what's going to make their lives better. That's what they focus on, and that's what they are informed on, because people are experts in their own lives. And yes, the United States government is a big, powerful government. It does lots of things. It spends $780 billion a year on its military. I get that. We are probably outsized in our ability to do things. However, in all cases, no one's ever the villain in their own story. Everything they do, they believe they're doing for the right reasons, I think. Now, granted, there's always going to be people doing it for selfish reasons and whatever. And this is the problem we have in the world, I think, when it comes to media. In movies and television for the last 70 years, every businessman is evil. They're willing to kill people to make money, and it's terrible. Whereas I believe most small business people provide jobs and make lives better for people. And most people aren't doing evil, crazy things. But we all want to believe those same conspiracies that are driving things behind Donald Trump. So yes, do we do things in the world that sometimes destabilize? Yes. Does it make for better stability in other ways? Probably. We can never know because we're always looking in the rearview mirror. And hindsight is always 20/20. So we can't make better informed people. We can give them all the information. The problem we have now is more disinformation that reinforces the things they already believe. And I'm more concerned about that, frankly, than people may or may not know in the international world. I wish we were better at it, but it's hard. People are focused on taking their kids to soccer, getting them to school, and doing those kind of things. And that's the other reason it's hard to get involved in democracy. It's not easy. It's hard anywhere to do that because we're so busy living our lives. That's why I would say we would hope to get to a point where governing is boring, and it kind of works. We don't have to worry about it as much, but it's going to require real skill and real focus right now over the next few years, because I do agree we are at a crisis nexus point of how democracy is supposed to grow and function in the world. I hope that helps you some on the answer.
Très bien. Il y a des questions au premier rang.
There's another question in the first row.
S'il vous plaît, madame. La démocratie, c'est aussi le respect des autres.
Democracy is also respecting other people's opinions, so do let other people ask their questions.
Madame, puisque...
Bonjour, oui, ça fonctionne, ok. So I'm going to ask it directly to you in English.
Yay.
I studied the 2020 elections in my last year of high school and produced a paper on it, and specifically the manipulation in the speeches given by both of the candidates. And I wanted to ask you personally, how do you think we can actually save or keep democracy in a country, and it's not only America, it can be France too, where there's only two main parties represented by one person to the eyes of the public that is only in for being voted? Like this, you've talked about it, winning the people, winning the states. It's all about winning the states and winning the people without obviously having a backbone on how to actually run the country within the way the government works. So my question is, how do you think we can actually save democracy in a bilateral party country where people think more about who they hate than who will help the country?
Well, that's simple. I'm kidding. That's not
just a second question altogether.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is...
Keep up with it for me so I remember.
Yeah.
You said that you stood up for your party, or because of your party. Mm-hmm. So my question is, why do so few in Congress in Washington, with a few exceptions, why do so few do the same, denounce publicly the big lie?
Okay, we'll start over here, and then come back over here.
Okay. Thank you.
It's not simple. I was being facetious. Having grown up in the United States democracy, it is a two-party system because we have the first across-the-line election style, which there's two different ways you can form coalitions. In a parliamentary system, you can have the person who absolutely reflects your values elected, and they're forced to do a coalition with somebody else. And that's done in the government post-election. In the United States and other countries like France and really England to a great degree, it is done pre-election. You have coalitions inside the large parties where you basically have, I guess you call them radical liberals, and we have pro-defense conservatives and traditional conservatives on one side, and you have the socialists, the Greens, the center-left Democrats in the other party. It forces us to have to do larger coalitions, which from my point of view provides more stability. Now what we've seen happen over the last few years is it's been discovered that hate and fear are very big drivers in elections, much more so than hope and the future. And we have to have people who are eloquent enough, and the problem is it comes down to personality. One of the things that Donald Trump had over everybody else was he had years on reality television. He had honed his thing down. He knew how to get the pulse of a particular group of people and speak to them directly in a way that drove the other side crazy. And he was a big disruptor, and it worked in 2016. The problem for him in 2020 was that it drove many more people against him to show up. So I think over time these things can work themselves out because at the end of the day, both political parties want to win. I do not think my party can keep rage as this underlying system for 2 to 4 years. It's just not possible, it's not tenable. And let's say Donald Trump is the nominee again. I guarantee you one thing, he's going to lose. Not because we're rigging the elections, because the American people are tired. Now, as I said earlier, in 2016, you had the nominee of Hillary Clinton and the nominee of Donald Trump. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with our nominating system where I said the only two people who could lose to the other person's nominee were the two people who were nominated, which is hard to do. And Joe Biden was sort of a consensus candidate, but he's not really loved. He doesn't have a strong base underneath him. So time does this. Lightning in a bottle, for lack of a better word, does it. And success can get to that point. One of the things, sans COVID, Donald Trump would be president today. If we had not had COVID, you got to realize there was so much success in the United States. We had the lowest unemployment rate, the highest black wages, the highest Hispanic wages. It was going very well until COVID hit. And he didn't handle it well, and it gave an opening to the Democrats on that side in order to win. And then it was allowing some of those things to change the dynamics. Because every battle plan is great until the first shot is fired, and that's when COVID hit, that derailed Trump. Time will fix some of those things. Now, for you, if I had to be honest, I would say cowardice is part of it, because everybody wants to be reelected, and there's a huge fear of the Republican base of voters who out there who believe Donald Trump. And what I've said to people is like, look, if this is your fear, real leaders have to be honest with their constituents. And that's one of the reasons I said if I was king for a day, you'd have to be a city councilman, county commissioner, or school board member, because you have the ability to learn to look at people and know it's okay to tell them no. Tell them, I'm sorry, you're incorrect. Think about John McCain when he was talking to the woman during the Obama campaign and said, I'm sorry, he is not a Muslim. We know he's not a Muslim, and I don't want people misleading you that way. The people who play into that, they might get temporary wins, temporary victories. But I think if you play for the long term, honesty, earnestness can go a long way. And I believe that there's a small number of Republicans who will, over time, start to go that direction. And what we've seen is, right after the election, 80% of Republicans thought it was stolen. At some polls show it's now down to 50. A more recent one showed it's about 60% of Republicans think it was stolen. But that number is getting smaller and smaller over time as Rudy Giuliani looks more and more unhinged, as Lynn Wood looks more and more unhinged, as the president continues to go and give the same speech. People are going to get tired of it, and they're going to say, okay, a stolen election has nothing to do with whether I can put food on my table, whether I can get a promotion, whether I can open a small business and follow my dream. After a while, it will fade off. And I believe it in my heart. I have faith that it'll happen, and I'm going to do everything from my point of view to try to make that happen. But again, I want you to realize there are millions of Trump supporters who are good people. And demonizing the people who supported him, all that does is keep the anger and fire alive. We need to be empathetic to those with whom we disagree. We need to be respectful of those with whom we disagree and listen. Listening is one of the keys to making democracy work. I remember one time we were doing a zoning vote, that's land use. I remember there was two people standing in front of me and said, no, you're not listening to me. It's like, I'm listening to you. I just disagree with you. Listening does not mean agreement. Listening means respectfully accepting what they have and giving them points back. Don't just say, I'm not listening to you because I think you're crazy. And that's what we have to do in all of democracies.
Thank you so much. We have two last questions, one over there and one over there.
Thank you.
Please.
Where am I looking? Oh, there you go, okay.
Is it me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I lost you for a second, I'm sorry.
After the 2020 election, a number of states are passing laws having to do with elections, how elections will be run, including Georgia first off, and then Texas and others. One of those laws disturbs me a lot, and that is a law that says that the state legislature will have the power to override decisions of the elections board of the Department of State as it relates to outcomes of elections or other decisions made by the election officials, such as yourself. These are Republican legislatures who have proposed and passed these laws. I just wonder how you feel about those laws, if they will actually ever work, or if you think it's a good idea to allow legislatures to override the election officials.
Well, first off, I sort of recognize your accent. You sound like you're from my home country.
Not Georgia, I am American.
What state are you from?
California, most recently.
Okay. Well, where were you born?
West Virginia.
All right. Mansion State. Well, first of all, remember when I said before, misinformation and disinformation is a dangerous thing. Your description of the law as passed in Georgia, unfortunately, isn't the actual law that was passed. It is the spin of people who have said the legislature can step in and throw out results. This is the reality of it. It's something that the secretary had asked for when he first got elected. We have failing counties, and I mentioned one of them was Fulton County, which is the capital of the city of Atlanta. And when we had a press conference one time in June, we got headlines starting from 1993 to 2000, to 2003, to 2002, to 2010, showing election failure after election failure after election failure. And they're habitually problematic. And the law we had asked for was for the secretary to be able to step in and essentially fix the problems. So what happened is, as a derivation of that, was they said, okay, if there is a failing county, the state election board can appoint 3 people to investigate. It will be a Secretary of State officer and a Republican election official and a Democrat election official. They go in and investigate the county to see if they're violating the laws and rules. And understand, in Fulton County, these are Democrats who are voting. This is a county that had long lines. They lost absentee ballots. I mean, in the June election, they literally deleted absentee ballot requests for people. This is a Democrat county that did that. The Secretary of State and the Republicans have nothing to do with that. It's just poorly run Democratic county. And we wanted to be able to step into that. So what they did is you can have 3 people do an investigation. You have 30 days at a minimum before you can report back. They're doing the investigation now of Fulton County. And in the meantime, they can begin to do efforts to fix the issues, but they can appoint somebody for a period of 9 months if they go in. Now, in the meantime, the county can appeal this to the Superior Court in Fulton County. And if the process started last month, so the Republican appointee would not even be there the time the election comes around. So if there's a result, by the time the certification comes in, under state law now, it takes 10 days to certify. We couldn't even begin the investigation to put somebody in place to throw out the votes by then. But it's a really great soundbite to raise money on and say that they're doing terrible things. We can only do 3 counties at any given time. We can't do a bunch of them. And I do think that if you use tools like that, if you use them irresponsibly, people will see you were using them irresponsibly. But I know the concern is that, well, by that point, the horse has left the barn and doesn't matter. But the problem is you can't kick it off and get it done in a time period to actually throw results out. It would take a bizarre set of timing to set it up to do it that way. And even then, I don't think they would throw the results out. What they would do is, are these votes being done properly and fairly? And one of the issues we had with some of the misinformation and disinformation about what happened last time is people like, there's missing chain of custody for 43,000 ballots in DeKalb County. We got to throw them out. It's like, no. A clerk not doing something right does not disenfranchise 43,000 people. And so that's the situation we're in. So the problem is they're scaring the hell out of people with descriptions like you had, saying Republicans are going to step in and throw out votes. I don't see it happening in real life. It's a way to step in and make counties do a better job. It's more of we have a carrot and stick approach. This is the stick to make them do a better job for their voters. And frankly, if we wanted to win elections in Georgia, we would leave Fulton County alone to continue to fail. I mean, they're going to lose more Democrat votes than anything if we leave them alone. Yes?
Thank you very much. The last 2 questions from the audience, and then we're going to move on internet. Please.
Yeah, thank you for being here. My question was similar. It was about the voting laws in Texas and Georgia. Like, you stood up for democracy in the 2020 election, and I don't see how you can, like, to me, it would make sense for you to stand up for democracy again by criticizing gerrymandering and restrictive voting laws.
Well, I do criticize gerrymandering, this over-the-top gerrymandering, because there's a way you can get to where it is illegal. And we've seen that in Georgia many times when Democrats gerrymandered and we go to court and we win. It hasn't been done under Republicans. Now, the other part we have is there was going to be a voter law in Georgia. 2 reasons. We had a brand new voting system and we had a COVID pandemic. We learned things from both of them. Now, some of the things they're criticizing as voter suppression. Here's a very simple example. We put in an absentee ballot request deadline, which is 11 days before the election day. Now, they said they're shortening the window and they're hurting people's ability to vote. No, it's the opposite of that. The reality was we saw in 2020, if you requested an absentee ballot 10 or more days out, 92% of those ballots were cast. If you asked for an absentee ballot from 10 days towards the election, 10, 9, 8, 7, only 58% of them were cast. So in Georgia, with the 11-day cutoff, we are protecting the franchise for those people who are expecting a ballot to show up and it doesn't show up because they have another week of early voting and they have election day. But we're being criticized and attacked. Here's the thing. We talked about before. Democrats and Republicans alike want to continue to win the news cycle and win the day. And one of the things that the Democrats did before anything was passed in Georgia, they bought a website called Jim Crow 2.0. It did not matter what was passed. They were going to attack it as voter suppression. Why? Because it's great for turnout and it's great for fundraising. But there's some things in that law that I don't like, absolutely. They did not do the law the way I would have done it. I criticized the fact that they have limited drop boxes. I've criticized the fact that they removed Secretary Raffensperger as political punishment from the state election board. I've stood up and done those things. However, it is not voter suppression, and We have 17 days of mandatory early voting. In Georgia, we have automatic voter registration, meaning that every person who gets a driver's license, when they walk in, they get registered to vote, unless they say, don't register me to vote. We have one of the highest voter registration rates in the United States. We have some of the highest African-American turnout in the United States. We have 17 days of early voting, no excuse absentee, 12 hours of voting on election day. It is really hard not to vote if you want to in my state. So when I hear people repeatedly criticizing us, calling us racists, which is another thing that people do, identity politics is another thing that's going to destroy all Western democracies. Treating people not as individuals but as groups over and over again undermines people's faith and puts one group against another group, and they're doing it for short-term gains. And it's the same thing with voter suppression. And yes, I started to get angry about this, and I apologize, but it's difficult for me to sit back and see one side, Stacey Abrams, being lionized as a hero, and Donald Trump attacked as a villain, when they both have said and done things that undermine people's faith in democracies. And when you poll Democrats now in the United States, over 50% still believe Russians hacked voting machines and flipped votes to give the election to Donald Trump. We have to get to a point where people aren't listening to crazy crap from Twitter. But I don't know, I'm not smart enough to know how to do that.
Thank you very much. Last question from the audience. Oh, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I can hear you, but they can't hear you through the mic, so I don't know what's going on. There you go, you're on.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here. It was very interesting to follow your presentation. I have a provocatory question, something that you already mentioned. Do you think that today in the American society there is a kind of self-criticism about how it was possible that in the last years the best candidate from the both party were, for example, you mentioned the thing about Donald Trump from one side and Clinton for the other. There is no in the society something thinking about why the two historical parties, why a so huge country with this democratic history has today this, well, the best options doesn't seem to be the best options in a sort of way. Sorry if I was so provocative about it, but sometimes we ask why a huge history sometimes arrives with so different outcomes.
That is in no way provocative to me. It sounds like the kind of discussion I have over a beer at my pub. I mean, that sounds like a normal conversation to have, like, what the heck did we do to create a system that caused this to happen? And first of all, let's realize something. Anybody who wakes up and says, I want to be president of the United States of America, probably isn't fully right in the head to begin with. I mean, because it is an insane amount of power to have, and you want to get people who say, I want to be there in a responsible way. It's hard to do. It's a difficult process to get through, and oftentimes it is luck, it is bad luck, it is money, it is all those things that get people in a position to do that. And one of the issues that we have in the United States is Donald Trump won the state of Georgia in the primary in 2016. I was for Marco Rubio. Just for the record, Marco Rubio won my congressional district, so at least my area voted not for Donald Trump. But he got 39% of the vote in Georgia, which means 61% of the people did not vote for him. However, the way we do the delegate allocation, it outsizes things. And the reason both Democrats and Republicans have done this is they want to get to a nominee faster. Because tactically, they believe if I have a nominee faster, I can start attacking the other guy faster and getting organized, and we're not fighting amongst ourselves, airing our dirty laundry. So we have a structural system that encourages getting to a fast thing, but by doing it quickly, you're getting somebody who has a minority of support to begin with. And I think that's probably the structural issue to get there. Now, I'm not smart enough. I need some academics to run the math to tell me the best way to do it to avoid that. But that is the reason we get some of that right now.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to questions from the internet, and I'll leave the floor to Valérie Vuillet from the State of Geneva. Just remind that the State of Geneva is organizing this Democratic Week. So Valérie, the floor is yours. What the people on the web are asking to Gabriel Sterling.
Thank you, Frederick. We received many questions, but already answered. Just one. What should be done for the Republican Party not to be Trump's party anymore? And will a reform come from the Lincoln Project, for example?
It will not come from the Lincoln Project. I can tell you that right now, unfortunately for them. They're a minor thing, and they point out some of the flaws with the president and the president's supporters. What it's really going to come from in the long term, got to turn down my mic because I'm hearing myself. The grassroots has to come to a realization that there is no single savior. But I do think it will require, in some ways, a personality to come forward that can be competitive with Trump. One of the things that Trump did was he belittled and was able to get by and become, the media loved it. The media loved Donald Trump because he got clicks and he got eyeballs because you never knew what he was going to say. So they are part of the reason he's there today, or he was there. So we have to be aware of that. And there has to be people who know how to use the tools of the media and use social media to get to that point. But they need to be for something. I'll tell you what I'm so sick of. I'm sick of people being against things. We need people who are for things. We need people who are for, good government. We want people to be for, things working. We want people to be for having a pathway to follow the dreams of people. I mean, like I said before, we live in a time of so much opportunity and so much availability to do what you want with your life. I mean, let's face it, for 300,000 years as human beings, it was the strongest person in the room was in charge, period. Then we had some fits and starts with democracy. We had Athens, we had the Roman Republic for a while. We've had other places here and there. We had the upper end of Scotland. I mean, here even in Switzerland. We've had fits and starts, but now we got into a groove for a while. America is a young country, but an old democracy. And I always am going to have faith that we will find a way. There's always a way. Am I smart enough to know exactly what it is? No, but the basics of it are you need somebody who has a good personality, you need somebody who's for something, you need somebody who can bring people together, you need somebody who understands the world and the government in which they work, so they can be honest, and I think that can come through and it can work. This is the thing that people don't understand about Donald Trump. He was honest for the people he was talking to. They knew he was being hyperbolic. They knew he was over the top. But the underlying meanings of it made sense to them. So that was why so many people on the left couldn't understand why these people listened to him. Because they understood what he meant. It's kind of like everybody has that crazy uncle who will say crazy things, but you know what he means. I mean, that's kind of the way millions of Americans looked at Trump. And for them, their lives were better. Their lives were better. So it's hard to argue with the outcomes for some of those. Now, people felt threatened, and I think some of the, bashing immigrants and those kind of things gave him an outlet that gave face to something which was bad. It was not a good way to do it, but it gave him some footing to start. And then he was able to build on that moving forward. And I think America is a generous, huge-hearted country. And we are so, in Western democracies, we're so rich now. We are so ridiculously wealthy. We argue over what a man and woman is now. We argue over things that don't make any sense to argue over, and then we get angry about things that don't make any sense to get angry about. There should be a path for anybody to get the job they want, given enough time and effort. There should be a path for people to live the kind of life they want that we have. The internet itself has allowed us to, you can have a side gig while doing your regular job. There's so much you can do that where this angst comes from is I think our brains were developed to always look for a threat. So if we can't find a real threat, we'll make threats up to fill the void in our brain. Because that feels like the way that we talk to communicate to one another. And I think it's an unhealthy thing, and we got to find ways to consciously know that we're always looking for a threat, but we need to consciously say to one another, it's all going to be okay. It all can work out, but it requires work. And democracy is something you constantly have to work on. And when I started this process, I never understood elections. I mean, I worked in elections, but you know what I do? I walk up, show my ID, I vote. I have voted elections easy. It's tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of workers across every nation who make them happen. And those are the people who we have to have faith in and understand that they're trying to do the right thing for you and your country and your county and your canton and your city. And that's the important thing we ought to accept in our hearts, and we need to not have people attacking them. These are all good people. Most people, to my belief, are fundamentally good. And we just got to give people the opportunity to be good and have good understanding with one another and listen to one another, like I said. That's the basis of it all. And maybe I'm overly optimistic, as Americans tend to be. And one of the things I meant to put in my speech earlier, when we talked about how we deal with situations, Winston Churchill might have said it best when Americans will always do the right thing after exhausting every other option. So I hope that that was an answer for that question, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel Sterling. The topic of this conference was how to save democracy, and perhaps it's by organizing other democratic moments like this one to talk about democratic life, democratic values, and to go back to the core and to the fundamental roots of what democracy is and what electoral vote and system is. So thank you so much for your time, for your energy to promote and to defend democracy, and not only American democracy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So in the name of the University of Geneva, the Graduate Institute and State of Geneva, thank you so much for this very important moment. I hope that for our community, the academic community, students, also the audience, large audience, that they will also use and refer to this talk to, I hope, enlarge your views about how a democratic process works and sometimes have some difficulties. So another democratic moment is going to be organized on Thursday, 7 October. It will be about artificial intelligence in democracy, e-voting, e-democracy, everything that makes our ordinary democratic life so passionate. So please come on Thursday in the same room at 6:30 for a conference, a roundtable with scholars, both from the university and the graduate. Thank you so much, and have a nice democratic night.